Nicola Sturgeon, who has announced her resignation as Scotland's first minister. Here's what she said. I get up in the morning and I tell myself, and usually I convince myself, that I've got what it takes to keep going and keep going and keep going, but then I realize that may not be true. I'm here with Maggie McGrath, editor of ForbesWomen. Maggie, those are poignant words. Do we tend to hear them more from women or just interpret it differently when it comes from a woman's mouth?
You know, you asked me that question a little bit ago, and I've been looking for academic research on it, and I didn't immediately find it. But I have to say, anecdotally, it feels like we are hearing that more from women. I feel like if I were resigning, I'd be more likely to frame it in my emotional experience than perhaps if my brother were resigning. Mm-hmm. So anecdotally, I'm having trouble thinking of a man who stepped down from a CEO or presidential or leadership role using that language. We saw it just recently with Jacinda Ardern, right. Now former Prime Minister of New Zealand. That was also framed in a I don't have any gas left in the tank type of way.
Well, it's interesting because those are two cases of people who've also been vilified very publicly by opponents. You know, let's start with Nicola Sturgeon, and she was sort of at a low point politically in any case. I don't know if that's a factor here, but do you want to talk a bit about the swirl around her?
So I'm not an expert in Scottish politics, but I have seen some rumblings and some polling around the Scottish National Party's popularity with voters. The FT reported that Scotland's voters prioritize healthcare and health services, but also doubted the SNP's ability to carry out their vision or desires in the healthcare space or in the health services space. Right. So that's a factor. Is it the primary reason? Who's to say what's in her heart? The other big factor we have seen is there was a proposed law in Scotland around gender identity. Mm-hmm. And this gets into the politics between Scotland and the British Parliament. And basically the British Parliament, to my understanding, said, no, you can't do that. But it was around gender identity. And of course, that touches on a point that has become a bit of a culture war, you know, allowing someone to identify. Allowing someone to choose their gender identity on their identification is something that those on the more conservative side disagree with. And anyone who steps in that, we see a lot, whether it's here, whether it's in Europe, whether it's beyond, a lot of fraught commentary around that.
We discuss a lot about misogyny in terms of coverage. You know, we're talking here as the media and the type of coverage that women leaders have. I know it's something certainly we saw with Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, a backlash against her. We've seen some of that, I think, with Nicola Sturgeon. Certainly here in the U.S., Nancy Pelosi and others. I mean, is that changing, or do you feel like are we still holding women, especially in politics, to a different standard and type of coverage?
It's interesting. I did find a study that indicated that it's different if it's a candidate versus an incumbent. Mm-hmm. We judge female candidates very harshly. Are they up for the job? They're battling a lot of cognitive biases on behalf of voters, because
including female voters,
as we saw in 2016 here in the States. This study that I found showed that the effect diminishes when it's an incumbent. Mm. So once they've kind of already proven themselves for the job. However, this is a case of like you can find whatever evidence you need depending on where you look. We have also covered studies at Forbes that show that when women make mistakes, they are judged more harshly than men are when they make mistakes. Men are seen as unlucky when they make a mistake. Women are seen as, oh, it's your fault.
Which is why they don't always come back and bounce back to the same extent. I mean, I have to admit, I find it disheartening in some ways, and this may be generational, to hear a woman leader stand up and cite burnout. And maybe that's something that they're normalizing it for the rest of us to do it. It does sort of raise the question of, are we giving fodder to people who think women can't take it in these roles, or they can't take it for too long?
I don't think so. I think they're showing a compassionate style of leadership. We also cover this at Forbes. Mm-hmm. Employees and voters, no matter which constituent group you're talking about, we want to see compassionate leaders. And I think 2-3 years into the pandemic, or we're officially in year 3,
Coming up
is the official 3-year anniversary. There's been a lot of talk about mental health. So I would like to think that women who stand up and say, I don't have anything left, are empowering men to say the same thing. Because Men are people too. Men can experience burnout. And if there is a male leader out there who feels like he does not have enough gas in the tank, maybe Nicola Sturgeon's speech will give a path to his own resignation and normalize it for all of us.